Today we were talking to Chris Packham, the well-known environmental TV presenter and wildlife photographer. We hear a lot about plastic waste, and some people even trying to ban plastic bags. What do you think about it, Chris?
Plastic, whether you like it or not, is an intrinsic part of all of our lives. It's an incredibly versatile material, and at this point in time, we simply can't do without it. So, in my opinion, we should firstly do everything we can to recycle it. If we can't do that, we should make sure that it's processed through a modern incinerator, whereby we recover as much of the energy as possible. If all else fails, then it goes to landfill. But whatever, you've got to think that there's a lot of plastic out there in the environment, and if we don't deal with it effectively, it's going to be floating around forever.
What should we do about the plastic which gets into the environment?
I think it's important that we should get our governments to legislate to make sure that all short-time plastic is degradable. Other countries have taken the lead on this. The United Arab Emirates have already done so, and other governments have already made sure that there's legislation in place. Come on, we've got to make it work for us.
So why not just ban plastic?
Because plastic is the most cost-effective way of wrapping things like food, for instance, that protect it from damage and from contamination, keep it in good order. There are alternatives, of course. There are things like paper bags, but basically they're much heavier, therefore they cost a lot more to move around. That takes up road space too. And at the end of the day, when it comes to recycling these types of products, it takes more energy and more water to do so. So plastic, for the moment, is the best way forward.
You have said that governments should legislate to make all short-life plastic degradable. As you know, there are two types of degradable plastic: hydro-biodegradable or compostable plastic, usually made from crops, and oxo-biodegradable, usually made from oil and natural gas. Which is best?
If we want to protect the open environment from plastic, then oxo-biodegradable has to be the way to go, because under normal conditions in the open it breaks down completely, and it's in use in more than 50 countries. The problem with the other biodegradables is that they're made from crops, and therefore they need to be composted to break down. And international standards of legislation dictate that they have to do so during the course of 180 days, and they must turn into CO2. So this is a huge amount of CO2 going out into the atmosphere, and only a small amount of good going into the soil. For the moment, oxo-biodegradables are the way to go.
But doesn't oxo-biodegradable plastic leave harmful residues after it has degraded?
It's sometimes said that oxo-biodegradables have heavy metals in them, and this simply isn't true. And also, when they do break down, they completely change their molecular structure. There are no petropolymers left whatsoever, and what remains can be naturally assimilated by the bacteria in the soil in just the same way as they would assimilate things from straw or from leaves. And, most importantly, it's been tested for its ecotoxicity, and as a consequence of that, it can come into contact with food without doing any harm whatsoever.
But isn't it better to make plastic from renewable crops instead of oil?
Well, you might think so, but what about the effort and the energy that goes into the production of the crops to start with? The fields have to be ploughed, the seed has to be transported there, it then has to be fertilised, it has to have insecticides put on it, it then has to be harvested and taken to the factory. All of this has a huge carbon cost, and then when it gets to the factory, it actually costs more in terms of energy to produce these sorts of plastics through the polymerisation process. In fact, a recent study in Germany has shown that oil-based plastics have a better life cycle analysis, particularly if they're recycled, than the compostable ones. And at the end of the day, I mean, in times like this, shouldn't we be concentrating on producing food on the land and effectively not growing plastic?
Some supermarkets are using recycled plastic bags. Isn't this good enough?
I don't like to knock people who are making positive steps when it comes to the environment, so we should commend the supermarkets for starting to use recycled plastic. But it would be great if they could take it the next step further. You see, the recycled plastic won't degrade, but if they used oxo-biodegradable recycled plastic, then it would, and that would be a positive advantage to the environment.
Have you seen the report recently prepared by Loughborough University for the British government?
It's quite a good review of the scientific literature, and it does have some very positive things to say about oxo-biodegradable, but some of the recommendations aren't entirely justified, and there's certainly some confusion when it comes to oxo-biodegradable and its ability to be recycled, or when it comes to composting. Indeed, the company that gave evidence when it came to composting was facing a management issue, and that's a cost issue, and it was down to the separation of plastic that could be composted and that couldn't. So even if oxo-biodegradable plastic were not out there, they would still have an issue. They'd still have to stump up the cost to do it, and frankly, they don't want to have to be bothered.
Is it possible to recycle oxo-biodegradable plastic with normal oil-based plastic?
Yes, and this is very clearly explained in a position paper on the Oxo-biodegradable Plastic Association's website. And whilst we're on recycling, there's another thing that's worth considering here, and that is that the crop-based biodegradable plastics cannot be recycled with normal plastic.
Some people say that degradable plastic encourages littering. What do you think?
I don't think so, and there was certainly no evidence in the Loughborough report to suggest that this was the case. And when it comes down to it, look, if people are littering, this is a cultural issue that we have to address. They're certainly not reading what's on the plastic to see if it's degradable before they chuck it out of their car window or tip it onto the pavement. That is something that has to be dealt with separately. It's education, and it's a cultural shift that we need.
So what is your message to governments around the world?
Well, you can reduce, reuse and recycle, but the bottom line is you'll never get your hands on all of the plastic out there to do this, so there will always be some that's out in the environment, and therefore it would be a great insurance policy if that plastic was oxo-biodegradable. And let's face it, there would be no North Pacific garbage patch if all the plastic in it had been oxo-biodegradable. So the bottom line is, act now, because future generations won't forgive you unless you do.
Thank you, Chris Packham, for this informative interview.